blacksmith's forge had been cold for 3 days when Mira Hendren rode into Dust Creek. Not cold from disuse. Cold because the man who ran it had decided, sometime between the death of his wife and the arrival of that particular Tuesday, that fire required a reason. She almost rode past. The sign above the door was sun-bleached to near nothing, the letters worn down to ghost shapes, but her horse had thrown a shoe 2 miles back and she had $11 to her name, and a daughter waiting in Abilene who didn't know her mother was coming. Mira tied the horse to the post and pushed the door open. The shop was dark. Tools hung on the walls in careful order, tongs and hammers and chisels arranged with the kind of deliberate precision that belongs to a man with too much quiet time. The anvil sat in the center of the room like an altar, and behind it, sitting on a low stool with his elbows on his knees, was a man staring at nothing in particular. He was perhaps 40, dark hair going gray at the temples, hands that looked like they'd been carved from the same iron he worked. He didn't look up when she came in. "I'm closed," he said. "Your horse threw a shoe," she said. "Out on the Creekside Road, black mare, about 15 hands. That horse is yours now if you fix her." That got him to look up. His name was Grant Ellison. She learned that later, from the woman at the dry goods store who seemed to feel Mira deserved a full accounting of the town's history before selling her a tin of coffee. Grant Ellison, the woman said, had come to Dust Creek 8 years ago with his wife Clara, who had died in the spring of the fever that took 4 others that year. He hadn't spoken much before that. He spoke even less after, but he fixed the shoe. He worked without asking her anything. She stood in the doorway of the forge while he coaxed the fire back to life, watching him work the bellows with the practiced economy of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. The iron went into the flame and came out glowing, and he shaped it on the anvil with clean, heavy strokes. No wasted motion, no performance of effort. When he was done, he named a price that was lower than she expected. "That's not enough," she said. "It's what I charge." "Then charge me more." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she thought she saw something shift behind his eyes as not softness exactly, more like recognition, the way a person looks at someone carrying the same kind of weight they've been hauling themselves. "Pay it or don't," he said. She paid it. She should have left then. That was the plan. Fix the shoe, ride on, reach Abilene by the week's end. But the sky was doing something bad to the west, the kind of purple-green color that means the weather has made a decision and isn't asking permission. The woman at the dry goods store, Mrs. Aldine Foss, who had apparently been a font of unsolicited information for her entire life, told Mira the storm would be here by nightfall, and that the hotel had flooded the previous spring and Mrs. Baxter's boarding house was full up with a party of railroad surveyors. "There's the livery," Mrs. Foss offered. "Mick lets people sleep there in a pinch." Mira had slept in worse places. She'd slept in a wagon with 2 children and no blankets. She'd slept on the floor of a church in a town whose name she'd already forgotten. But the livery turned out to be no drier than anything else in Dust Creek, and by the time the storm arrived in full, the roof was making its own decisions about where the rain should go. She was moving her bedroll for the 3rd time when she heard the door. Grant Ellison stood in it, a lantern in one hand and a look on his face that suggested he was already regretting whatever impulse had brought him here. "The house has a dry room," he said, "off the kitchen. Used to be a pantry. There's a cot." She looked at him. He looked at the middle distance somewhere past her shoulder. "I'm not asking anything," he said. "Just that you're somewhere that doesn't leak." She thought about saying no. She was good at saying no. She had made an art of it over the past 4 years, saying no to things that were easier than they seemed, and to people who offered help with one hand and wanted something with the other. But the rain was coming through the roof in 3 places now, and her bedroll was soaked, and something in the way he was already half-turning, already preparing himself for her refusal, made her say yes instead. The house was clean. That surprised her. She'd expected the gray interior of a man who had given up on things, but the kitchen was swept and the dishes were stacked, and there was a braided rug on the floor that had been recently shaken. The pantry room was small, barely enough space for the cot and a small table, but it was dry and it smelled of cedar and something else she couldn't name, like old smoke and pine soap. "There's a bolt on the inside," he said, showing her. "Pantry door, I noticed," she said. "I sleep at the back of the house. Other side of the kitchen." He was giving her the geography of the place in a way that she understood. "Here is where I am. Here is where you are. Nothing in between without your permission." She nodded. He nodded. He went. She lay on the cot in the dark and listened to the rain make itself at home on the roof above her, and thought about Abilene. Thought about her daughter, Penny, 8 years old, and staying with Mira's sister until things settled. Mira had been telling Penny things would settle for 2 years now. She was starting to believe it herself. In the stubborn way you believe things because the alternative is unbearable. She didn't mean to pray out loud. It had been a habit from childhood, talking to God the way some people talk to themselves, not expecting an answer so much as needing to say the thing to someone. She'd gotten out of it in the years of her marriage, and then she'd gotten back into it in the years after, when there was no one else to talk to after the children were asleep. She prayed quietly, in the dark. For Penny, for the road ahead, for whatever it was that kept her moving when every reasonable instinct said to stop. She prayed the way you do when you're not sure anyone's listening, but you need to speak anyway. The words small and honest, and not meant for anyone else's ears. She didn't know the kitchen wasn't as empty as she thought. Grant had come back for water. That was all. A glass of water before bed, the same as he'd done every night for years. He'd been standing at the basin when he heard her voice, low and private, coming through the crack under the pantry door. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. He stood there in the dark kitchen and listened to a woman he'd known for 6 hours, pray for her daughter by name, pray for the courage to keep going, pray with the matter-of-fact honesty of someone who had run out of pretense and was down to the plain truth of what she needed. He set the glass down without filling it. He went back to bed. He didn't sleep. In the morning she was up before him, which he hadn't expected. She'd found the coffee and made it, and was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup when he came in. She looked up at him without embarrassment, the way people look when they've decided to occupy a space cleanly rather than apologetically. "Thank you," she said. "For the room. Storm's past," he said. "Road'll be muddy. You might want to wait a few hours." He didn't know why he said it. She didn't question it. She just nodded and looked back at her coffee. He found himself making breakfast. Not elaborate, eggs and bread and the last of a jar of apple butter that Clara had put up the autumn before she got sick. The one jar he'd never opened. He opened it now without deciding to. It was just the next thing. She didn't comment on the food. She ate it quietly and thanked him quietly and helped wash the dishes without being asked. And somewhere in the middle of that ordinary activity, something in the house changed. The particular quality of the silence changed. It stopped being the silence of one person alone in a space and became the silence of two people comfortable enough to stop performing. He noticed it. He didn't say anything about it. She stayed another day. The road was still bad, and he had ironwork to finish, and she offered to help sort the hardware in the storeroom because she'd seen it, and it looked like it had been organized by someone in a hurry, and then never revisited. He said that was fair. She spent the afternoon in the storeroom while he worked the forge, and when she came out at dusk she'd created a system with labels written on small squares of paper in a handwriting that was neat and slightly left-leaning. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I did," she said. "It was bothering me." He almost smiled. She saw it almost happen. That evening she asked him about the tools on the wall. Not because she needed to know, he thought, but because she was the kind of person who was curious about the things other people had made their lives around. He told her about the work, the orders that came in from the ranches, the particular satisfaction of a piece of iron that came out right, the way a bad day in the forge still felt better than most other things he could imagine doing. She listened without hurrying him. She didn't offer opinions. She just listened, and he found himself saying more than he'd intended, things about the work that he'd never had occasion to tell anyone because there was no one to tell. At some point he became aware that he was talking to her the way he used to talk to Clara. Not about Clara, about himself. About his own thoughts, the small interior things that don't find their way out unless there's someone present who makes space for them. He stopped. "Sorry," he said. "I'm talking too much." "You're not," she said, and she meant it. He could tell. On the third morning she told him she had to go. She said it plainly, without apology. Her daughter was waiting. She'd been away too long already. He nodded. He went to the forge and came back with a small iron hook, the kind used to hang a lantern from a post. Simple work, 10 minutes. He'd made a dozen of them for other people. He held it out. "For your place," he said, "when you get settled somewhere." She took it. Her fingers brushed his, and neither of them made anything of it. He walked her to where her horse was tied. The mare was rested, and the shoe was holding, and the sky was the clean pale blue that comes after a storm has washed everything. Mira put her foot in the stirrup and swung up, and for a moment she just sat there, looking down at him. "My daughter's name is Penny," she said. He didn't know why she was telling him that. Then he understood. She was giving him something real. The way you give someone something real when you've decided they deserve to know you're a person with a whole life. "Tell her the shoe cost her," he said. Mira laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, and it changed her face into something he hadn't quite seen yet. He thought he could have stood there looking at it for a long time. She rode out. He watched until she was a dark shape on the pale road, and then a smaller shape, and then nothing. He went back to the forge. He lit the fire. He hadn't been sure he was going to do that. But his hands found the bellows, and his hands remembered what they were for, and the iron went in and came out, and he shaped it the way it was supposed to be shaped, and The work was the same as it had always been, except that it wasn't, exactly.
It was the same in every technical respect, and entirely different in the way it felt to do it. He thought about what she had prayed for, courage to keep going. He turned that over in his mind while he worked, the way you turn a piece of iron, looking at all the angles. 6 weeks later, a letter came.
He almost didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope because he'd only seen it once, on small squares of paper labeling the hardware in his storeroom. But he recognized it. The letter was brief. She'd made it to Abilene. Penny was well. She was working at a school there, helping the teacher with the younger children. They had a room at a boarding house that had a window facing east, and in the mornings the light came in and made the whole room warm. She did not ask for anything. She did not suggest anything. She wrote it the same way she'd talked to him, plainly, without performance, as if she were simply giving him a true account of where things stood. At the bottom she'd written,
"The hook is on the wall by the door. It holds a lantern just right." He read the letter twice.
He put it in the tin box on the shelf where he kept things worth keeping. He sat for a while in the quiet of the kitchen. Then he got out paper and wrote back. His letter was also brief. The forge was busy with spring work. He'd taken on an apprentice, a 15-year-old boy from one of the ranches who showed an aptitude for it. The storeroom labeling system was holding up. He paused for a long time before the last lines. Then he wrote, "I heard you that night."
In the kitchen. I wasn't trying to.
"But I heard you, and I want you to know. Everything you prayed for seemed reasonable to me, worth praying for." He folded the letter and sealed it before he could change his mind. They wrote back and forth through the spring. The letters were never long. They were the kind of letters written by people who are careful about what they say, who choose words deliberately, who understand that what they put on paper will be read more than once in a quiet room. She wrote about Penny learning to ride a neighbor's pony, and the way Penny talked constantly once she'd decided someone was trustworthy. He wrote about the apprentice and the ironwork, and once, about Clara, a single paragraph, plain and honest, about what it had been like to lose her and what the years since had been like. She wrote back about her own husband, the marriage that had been wrong from the start, and the courage it had taken to leave it, and the particular grief of leaving something that was bad for you, which is not like other grief, but is grief nonetheless. After that, something settled between them in the letters.
The particular quality of two people who have told each other the true things.
In July, he rode to Abilene. He told himself it was on business. There was an order to deliver to a ranch 2 days' ride past the town, and it made sense to go through Abilene.
These things were true and also not the whole truth, and he knew it, and he went anyway. He found the boarding house without much trouble.
He was sitting on the steps when she came home from the school, and Penny was with her, a small, serious-faced girl with her mother's eyes and an expression of frank appraisal. She turned on him immediately.
"Are you the blacksmith?"
Penny asked.
"I am," he said.
Penny nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "Mama has your letter in the tin by her bed," she said. "Penny," Mira said.
"It's true,"
Penny said. Mira looked at Grant with something complicated on her face. Embarrassment, amusement, the particular expression of a mother whose child has decided honesty is always the best policy.
"Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." He stayed 3 days.
He slept at the hotel on the main street and spent the days with Mira and Penny, at the school while Mira worked, at the market, in the small park where Penny liked to chase the pigeons with a single-mindedness that seemed to reflect her general approach to life. He and Mira talked more easily in person than in letters, which surprised him. He hadn't been sure it would work that way.
Sometimes what works on paper doesn't translate to the live, breathing, actual person, but she was exactly who the letters had suggested she was, and he supposed he was exactly who his letters had suggested he was.
On the last evening, Penny had been put to bed, and they were sitting on the boarding house steps in the warm July dark, and Mira said, "You know you don't have to decide anything."
"I know," he said. "It can stay the way it is. I know that too." She looked at him. But I don't think I want it to stay the way it is," he said.
"I think I'd like." He stopped. He was not a man who had ever been good at saying the next part. "I think I'd like Penny to know where to find me."
"Reliably."
Myra was quiet for a moment.
"That's a careful way to say it," she said. "I'm a careful man." "I know you are." She looked out at the street. "I'd like that too, for her to know."
He nodded. She nodded. They sat there in the warm dark for a long time after, not saying much more, because the thing that needed to be said had been said and the rest could wait. The rest had time. That was the thing about choosing something real over something easy. It didn't have to happen all at once. You could do it in pieces. You could do it in letters and 3-day visits and careful sentences on boarding house steps while the summer dark went soft around you. He rode out the next morning. Penny stood on the steps and waved until he was out of sight, with the same determination she applied to chasing pigeons. Mira stood beside her.
She wasn't waving, she was just watching, and when he turned one last time at the edge of town, she was still there, standing in the morning light, and she raised one hand, not a wave, just a gesture. The kind of gesture that means I see you. Go on, come back, he went on. He came back.
That part is simple, and the simple parts are the ones worth remembering, not the hard years before, not the loss and the leaving and the long roads, not the storm or the cold forge or the prayers she didn't know he heard. Those things matter, but what matters more is what they led to. A man who learned to light his fire again, a woman who stopped running long enough to let someone see her, and a little girl who always knew exactly where to find both of them.